Hello and welcome back to r/Entitled Parents. And if you're new here, I hope you enjoy. Entitled mother thinks she has to be invited to everything, gets her husband to scream at us. I had originally posted a version to r/Am I the Antagonist, but it was suggested to post here as well. Sandy is my uncle's girlfriend. No one in our family but my uncle likes Sandy. Why? Well, for starters, she's still married and living with her husband and daughter. Secondly, she's a huge narcissist and throws a tantrum every time she doesn't get her way. About a month into my uncle and her dating, we were going to take family pictures, and she's there with her daughter. We asked her for a few pictures with just my grandma and her grandkids, but that didn't go over too well at all. Sandy starts screaming that she's dating my uncle, so that means she and her daughter are family too, and deserve to be in the pictures just as much as everyone else. Sandy has even stalked my grandma, who is only 4'9" and in her late 70s. Back in March, when the pandemic was starting, my grandma was living alone, so she had to do her own errands. My grandma went to Costco one day, and there Sandy was, casually running into my grandma. Apparently Sandy was thinking about getting a Costco membership, but she doesn't like the Costco that's 30 minutes closer to her. Then a few weeks later, she shows up at the same pharmacy that my grandma goes to, because Sandy's pharmacy didn't have the medicine she needed, so they sent her to the one that was 35 minutes from her. Sandy also showed up at my grandma's bank on the exact day that my grandmother decided to open a savings account for her grandkids. Sandy asked my grandma what she was doing, and when my grandma told her, Sandy launched into a fit because, "What about my daughter? She's technically your grandkid too." My uncle and her had only been dating for about 3 to 4 months at this point. Just as my grandma was about to say something, the bank security came over and asked if my grandma was okay. They had known her from decades of her banking there, as well as all of her kids and grandkids. So when my grandma said no, they immediately escorted Sandy out. Shortly after that, my grandma moved states to live with my aunt, and that's so far been the last of the stalking incidents. On Thanksgiving, we all did a Zoom dinner instead of having a big gathering. About a half an hour into the meal, my uncle's phone starts going crazy. It's Sandy. She starts demanding to know why she wasn't invited and goes into full tantrum mode. So, my uncle caves and sends her the link. As soon as she gets on, Sandy starts screaming, and her daughter, Amy, who is 12, is running around in the background screaming and crying that it's not fair. Sandy starts calling us all selfish idiots, and then her husband starts yelling at us that we can't do that to his wife. My grandma had had enough of Sandy and scoffed at her. "See? This is why nobody here likes you. This is why we do everything without you. This is why I'm so glad that you and that rabid kid of yours aren't invited to my granddaughter's wedding." No big dramatic ending. We just ended the call because everyone was super angry. We decided to do another one without my uncle the next time, and that was absolutely fine. And our next story. Boy hit me with chair, so my mum almost owned a daycare. This story happened when I was 6 years old, but my mum retells it so often that the details are ingrained. I went to daycare while my mum worked. The daycare had a large playground with a jungle gym, plastic lawn chairs for sitting, a slide, swings, sandbox, and a playhouse. One day, a boy kept sliding down the slide without giving anyone else turns. I decided to take a turn as he reached the bottom. When I reached the bottom of the slide, the boy hit me in the right side of my face with a blue plastic lawn chair. I started crying and ran towards the teacher. The boy kept trying to make me be quiet and pushed me. Now, the playground was covered with pebbles and sand, and I was wearing shorts, so I hurt my knees and hands. I already could barely see, and this made me cry louder. A day worker came over to me, admonished the boy, and cleaned up my hands and knees. I actually had bloody scrapes on my knees that needed bandages, cuts and bruises on my right cheek, and my right eye wouldn't open properly. All of this is important for what happened next. My mum picked me up at the same time as most parents. When she saw my bandages and my injured eye, she got out of her car, stormed into the daycare, and demanded to speak to the staff. She was yelling at the top of her lungs to find out who was responsible, what happened, and why she wasn't called about my injuries. The boy, we'll call him Carl, and his mum were at the daycare. I told my mum that Carl did it. Mum. Who's Kyle? I pointed at Carl and his mum getting ready to leave. My mum stormed over there, and although I don't remember the exchange between her, staff and Carl's mum, my mum made it clear that she would make them pay. My mum took me to the hospital, got photos taken, and called the police at the hospital to take a report and press charges against the daycare. My mum was serving in the US Navy at the time. She had a lawyer the next morning. Mum called the local news and did an interview with me at her side. Parents started pulling their children soon after. The director of the daycare asked to sit down with my mum a few days later. My mum, her lawyer, and I sat in the office, and she made her terms clear. The daycare could pay for my injuries out of court, or the local news could cover the trial as they went to court. They settled for an amount that my mum refuses to disclose. My optometrist says to this day that my right eye is smaller than the left and that my right eye has worse vision, but the daycare closed the year after I got injured. And our final story today: am I the antagonist for being completely honest to my biological parents about how my childhood was really awful? I was given up for adoption right after I was born. Unfortunately, my adoption didn't work out, and I grew up in foster care until I turned 18. I'm now 19 and in college. In February, I got a Facebook message from a man claiming to be my father. We messaged back and forth, and while I kept a lot of my childhood details private, we did make plans to meet him and my mother. They weren't married to each other, by the way. When I got to the restaurant, I was very shocked and honestly upset to find my father and mother had brought their spouses, as well as their children, to surprise me. My father's mother, so my grandmother, was also there. I was already feeling very emotional about the whole thing, and seeing everyone there did not help. So I sat through an hour of listening to them sharing all about their lives while I fake smiled through everything. Honestly, I felt very jealous that they had kids they really loved, and how they all had really happy lives after ditching me. Then they started asking about me and my parents, and how my Facebook gave very little away about my life. I basically lost it and started crying like a little bench, and told them how bad my life was, and how bad my adoptive parents were, how bad foster life is. I was pretty snarky and sarcastic when I said that I'm glad their lives worked out well for them, because mine sure as heck didn't. I couldn't stop crying, and my father had to drop me back home. He was very apologetic. I feel very bad about it. I made my mother and father cry at the restaurant too. They were really nice to me. I got a few messages from my mother and father separately where they've been apologising and asking if they could make it up to me. My mother in particular seems really upset by everything, and I hate that I may have messed up her happy life. Her last message basically said that she's been unable to sleep and wants to see me again. I've been ignoring their messages and have just been focusing on school instead. Am I the antagonist? Maybe I should have been more honest before the meetup. Let's start with the most controversial take from Jake Fortune. No antagonists here. If you can put yourself in their shoes 19 years ago, they had a heart-wrenching decision to make, probably the biggest, hardest one of their life. They decided on what they thought would be best, then had to live with that choice. Of course they hope that they made the right one, and the crappy part about living in this universe of ours is they might have still made the right decision, even though it sucked for you. The alternative might have been even worse. My hope is you look at them with a bit of compassion and that they can do the same for you. It's easy to think about just yourself, and you shouldn't ignore your own feelings. Simply respond to them and say you need a little time to process things. Mention that you're looking into therapy once you can figure out how to pay for it, and that maybe at a future time you'd like to open things up a bit by just talking to the both of them directly. that you would like to talk about your history with them in an open way, maybe even facilitated by the therapist. Remember about therapy though, the therapist can't fix you. They're there to help you try to make yourself better, so don't treat them as an adversary. That's why a lot of times it fails, and you might have to go to a few different ones who just match with you. I don't understand why it was downvoted so much, because I do agree with most of what is said here. However, I genuinely believe that the parents deserve more criticism for inviting random unknown family members. It would have been awkward for OP anyway, meeting their parents for the first time. The fact that their parents that they've never met and they're meeting them for the first time, you're so excited and nervous about that already, and then they have the audacity to invite a bunch of other family members that they're already, familiar with. So it's no pressure on them, and just heightening this pressure for OP. It's very insensitive, it's very inconsiderate, questionable intent there. All the best with OP with that one. Booply Dooply says, not the antagonist. They messed up your chance at a happy life too. You were never wrong to tell the truth or to share how you feel. There's no way they could have known that they were giving you up to a worse life than they could have provided. And I'm sure they hoped desperately that you were bound for a better life. But better the devil you know. They would have at least known if they hadn't given you up. It's a difficult situation on all sides, but your feelings are completely valid, and you don't owe them anything. Their guilt is their own, and you can't take it for them. Not the antagonist. Your biological parents were, at best, very thoughtless. No wonder you were overwhelmed. I don't think you did anything wrong with how you reacted, and really don't think you have anything to feel bad about. Your biological parents don't sound like bad people, just rather thoughtless. I expect they presumed that because you ended up in college, things went well for you. Parents who give their kids up for adoption tend to hope that everything works out well for the child and that the kid has a better life than they can offer. You being upset demonstrated that their success and happiness has had a big cost to you, and that's hard to be confronted with. It doesn't sound like they're upset with you though, which is why I don't think they're bad people. Ultimately, whether you give them a chance or not is entirely up to you. I'd suggest a therapist who specialises in this area to help you work things through. No antagonists here. You have a right to your life, and they have probably spent the last 19 years clinging to the idea that you had a better life than they could give you. Being hit by the reality that their happiness now is built from the opportunities they had by condemning you to misery has probably hurt them quite a bit, but that's not your fault. Also, I don't think inviting a bunch of random people really helped the situation though. BSing 24/7 says, the biological parents sounded like they thought OP had a good life with adoptive parents and wanted to link the families up, but to their horror, that wasn't the case. They are still jerks though. Not the antagonist. Yeah, so even if OP had a good life and, great childhood, I think it's just so bad that you've invited some random people like, hey. So that's what I think, and that's what various random people on the internet think. I want to know what you think. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.